So we've moved on to the trim segment, and the first thing I want to do once we move on to the trim is to analyze the surface, look for any imperfections, anything that might need addressing as far as preparation. And the first thing I notice, besides the presence of a gloss that will have to be addressed, is previous paint jobs did not address some of the gloss on there. As we see how this is chipping off, this is one of the danger zones to not properly prepping the surface. So now that we've discovered that we have a paint adherence issue, I want to recommend to you, and I can't stress this enough, that we're just going to very gently and very carefully remove the worst areas, and the worst areas only. This particular area has been tested for lead, and there's no presence of it where we're working. And especially in an old house such as this, the best course of action outside of a complete lead abatement by a professional is to cover the surface, not expose the surface. However, primers are made to solve some of these problems. So I've lightly scraped some of this loose and peeling paint. I'm going to simply, very lightly, feather the edges for appearance. And my universal latex primer will help the top coat bond. It will seal my imperfections, it'll level things off, and it'll seal a lot of this gloss paint. So my next step is I'm going to fill these 2 nail holes. There's not a large presence of nail holes on this trim, fortunately. So this is a perfect product for smaller holes. Painter's putty, flexible, very easy to work with, and resist shrinking. So I'm going to take a pretty moderate sized ball. I'm going to knead it in my hand, roll it, and I'm going to take a small workable amount in my hand, and I'm going to fill each hole. I like to do this in a 2-part My first is, it looks to me like I've got it about 85–90%. I'm going to take a little small amount just to make sure, the goal here is to make sure that the hole disappears and your fill is on the same plane as the surface, so that when we're ready to apply our primer over this repair, small repair, it'll be as though the holes never existed. So we filled our nail holes, we've addressed some of our peeling paint. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly sand this surface, and again I'm emphasizing lightly because we do not want to sand through this coat of paint. And I'm going to basically use a conjunction of flat sandpaper as well as our small sanding sponge. The reason why I'm going to use a sanding sponge is it contours to the surface, and it's very easy to use since we have somewhat of elaborate trim here. Very effective at hitting our corners. And I just want to stress that our goal here, since we're going to be priming, is just to knock off any highs and lows, any irregularities, perhaps any paint drips that have accumulated, and just give it a general, smooth, flat appearance. And we'll be ready for our primer. I'm going to use my sanding sheet on the flat surface. And I can see already I've knocked out a couple burrs that were on the surface. Now that we've finished sanding our trim, I'm going to remove any of the surface dust that might get in the way of the performance of our primer. And I'm going to use 2 tools, very simple, my dust brush and my tack cloth that we used on the walls. I start at the top and work my way to the bottom. Now my brush is probably removing 99% of the dust, in all honesty. But for a professional finish, whatever small amount of dust is still remaining, this will take care of, especially in some of our grooves. You can see my tack cloth is pretty sticky, and it picks up all the dust that might be remaining. After this, I'm confident that my trim is 100% ready for primer, as it's clean and dust-free. Okay, so similar to the wall application of primer, the same rules apply to our trim. Now I'm working here with the same primer I used on the walls, my universal latex primer. Now since we're dealing with a elaborate profile here, elaborate trim, I'm going to try to work my way to the top piece. So I'm going to work my way from the inside out. Now notice I'm not starting my top piece here. I'm going to try to cut this in so I don't get any unsightly lap marks in case this starts to set up by the time I get to the top. Now after I feel as though I've covered the surface, I'm going to try to make my brush strokes disappear. I'm going to take a semi-dry brush. I'm going to smooth right where I started. Now if there is a presence of brush strokes, which there will be just slightly, you'll see that the brush strokes are going all in the grain and the direction of the wood. I have no brush strokes this way, which is unsightly and unprofessional. It's all in the direction of the wood. Now once this primer has a chance to completely dry, it'll dry to the touch in about 1 hour, but it'll be completely ready to recoat in 3 to 4 hours. We are ready to proceed with confidence with our final coat of paint.